Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to take place in the 6th chapter of Job. We're going to divide this one in half. We're going to take this lesson all the way up till the 13th verse, but before we do that verse-by-verse commentary analysis, we just need to briefly review to set the context in which this emerges, the narrative context. The book of Job thus far consists of two dialogues, and the wheels are just in motion in the latter. The first dialogue occurs in heaven, the second dialogue occurs on earth. So in heaven, the dialogue consists of Yahweh pointing with pride to his servant Job, and Satan says, "Oh, you've blessed him and prospered him. Take around this hedge, and he will curse you to your face." And Yahweh says, all right, bring it on. He accepts the challenge, and he just imposes one limitation. You cannot take Job's wife. So two things we learn there that are essential for understanding in the relationship between Yahweh and the devil is that Yahweh's power and providence is infinite and unlimited. The devil's is not. He can only operate at the sovereign behest and permission of Elohim. So if a temptation ever comes your way, don't regret it. Despise not discipline, as we're going to read in the review here. But the adversary, if you give him an inch, he will take a mile. That's the second main thing we learn about him. He takes all Job's livestock. He crushes and kills all his children, and leaving only him and his wife, and then to add insult or injury to insult, rather, or other way around, vice versa, roughly interchangeable. He inflicts his skin with terrible skin boils. So Job is lost his health and wealth and inexplicably vanished in a moment. Then we read that assessing his situation, well, first off, Job does not curse. He does not indulge the devil. He does not satisfy the devil's desire in cursing Yahweh to his face. We read of that 2 times in chapter 1, verse 21. Naked I came unto the earth, and naked I shall return. Yahweh giveth, Yahweh taketh away. Blessed be the name of Yahweh. So he even blesses Yahweh, even though he is miserably cursed and afflicted. That would not be an understatement. And then in the 2nd chapter, the 10th verse, his wife challenges or tells him, why don't you just curse Yahweh and die? And Job is in agreement with the second part. He would very much like to die. That is the dialogue on earth, which begins after a 7-day period when his 3 comforters, who are named, the first of which is Eliphaz, the Temanite, who gets the dialogue on earth in motion. Job is the first one to speak after this 7-day period, and the third chapter can be summarized and simplified to a single phrase. It would be a death wish. Then Eliphaz the Temanite puts his own input over the next 2 chapters, and then in this chapter the dialogue returns to Job. So each chapter is a monologue or part of a monologue to a single individual. There is no back and forth. This is a prolonged argument followed by a response. So Job's answer takes up the next 2 chapters, and it's not uncommon for, I don't think any of them exceed 2, but sometimes they're 1 and sometimes they're 2 chapters in length from Job and his 3 and eventually 4th comforter. And Eliphaz is the first to go, and in the 4th chapter he opens it and he appeals through observation. Then in the second half he claims to be the recipient of a revelation in a dream and shares what he has learned, and closes the chapter the passage we're going to be reviewing before the lesson itself. And we divided the 5th chapter into 2 verses. The divisions are such: Eliphaz once more appeals to observation, and then he offers a doxology, and then he gives some advice and observation intermixed and intermingled, shaped by observation, to Job. Verse 17 rather. Look, blessed is the man whom Elohah reproves, so do not despise the discipline of El Shaddai. Now, Job was being disciplined, but not because he had done anything wrong. He was more fully and accurately being tested, but tested is a process of discipline. So the discipline word is not the most accurate or appropriate, I feel. I think do not despise the testings of El Shaddai, because he was doing this to prove a point to Satan that even though you may have the rest of the world under their sway, there will always be at least one righteous man who will not forsake my name in all calamity. And For he bruises and he binds up, he smites but his hands heal. So in the power of him is destruction, death, and also life and healing and restoration. He is sovereign, he is mighty, he is El Shaddai, we read for the first of 31 times in the book of Job. That is a reference to his omnipotence. So the same hand that can cause a city to collapse in an instantaneous moment is able to heal an entire nation in the same duration of time. Then he reads, or he writes, or it's recorded rather, of the 6 distresses that he will deliver. Actually 7, and no evil will strike you. That's a poetic device common 33 or 4 times in the 30th chapter of Proverbs. Agar writes, I have seen 3 things, no 4. So that's just to lead to the number 7, and a few of them are, and you shall know that your tent is in peace, when at destruction and at starvation you laugh, and you will have no fear of the beast on the earth. So they're going to have no cause or reason to be alarmed or concerned by famine. They're still going to eat, and they're not going to starve in this lifetime, and they're also going to be fearless when confronting beast. Beast were probably a more realistic threat to ancient agrarians than modern urban dwellers. And verse 24, and you shall know that your tent is in peace, and shall visit your land and not sin. So the tent is a home, and that's what is meant by the word. So his home will be sin-free, and their contention, Eliphaz earlier implicitly suggests that the wind which blew down the structures protecting Job's children were sent as a punishment because of his sin. So this is to have the knowledge when none of these things. First off, the number 7 in these 7 verses, there are 7 shalls, and the final one of which is, you shall come to the grave in ripe old age, like the stacking of grain in its seasons. So this is the expected blessing and consequence and result of living in righteousness, a long age. And the path of righteousness may not necessarily add years to your life, but they will add life to your years. There is a quantitative increase that is not guaranteed, but the qualitative, I can assure you, is guaranteed. Look, this we have searched out, and it is, so hear it, and know for yourself. So he's sharing his wisdom, his knowledge, what, these men fancy themselves purveyors of wisdom, but of all the 4, Job speaks the most correctly about Yahweh and is vindicated by him in the 42nd chapter. So there's 3 dialogues in the book of Job, the one in heaven between God and Satan, and the one on earth between Job and his 3 and eventually 4 comforters, and then there's the one between Yahweh and Job and all the periphery. Yahweh's listening the whole time. Opening verse, chapter 6, lesson itself. And Job answered and said, now I don't want to spend too much time elaborating on so terse a verse, but I just want to get you to imagine and anticipate in advance, if possible, how might he respond. So how might you respond to someone who gave such words of wisdom and comfort and counsel in such a situation as is in Job's? We have no parallel experience to Job's, literally the worst suffering imaginable, to have everything and to lose it, to have health and wealth and prosperity and just success and reverence and to lose it. But the 2 things the adversary couldn't take were his faith and his integrity, so he never forsook those. But he is, he understandably, this leads off the death wish. The first time he spoke in the 3rd chapter was he wished for death, but he wasn't willing to do it. He was praying that Yahweh would end his suffering and his misery and his torment by killing him himself, and that's much of what we read of in the chapter which ensues. Oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed, and my calamity be placed on the scale, for it would outweigh the sands of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. So he's comparing the grief and the agony of his suffering and his plight and his dilemma and just his problems. He doesn't have a single problem. He has literally the most immeasurable amount, to have everything and to lose it all at once. Health, wealth, family, everything just down. So, he feels that the sand of the sea is a weighty object, an innumerable object. Elsewhere, we read that term in the New Testament somewhere, I think, the sands of the sea to Abraham, whether he looked at the sky above, the numbers of the star in the sky, and the number of sands on the sea would be his descendants and his progeny. But he says it would outweigh the sand of the sea, and he's pleading for some empathy and understanding as to why his words have been rash, because this is a natural human response to such a supernatural situation. So in the next verse, we read that Job has the sense and premonition that he is being judged for something he did not do, but he was just being tested. So the fourth verse reads, "For the arrows of El Shaddai are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison. The onslaughts of Eloah are arrayed against me." So Job somewhat similarly subscribes to much of the archaic, simplistic theology of his tormentors. He thinks that judgments are sent, anything, pain, whether blessings or curses, are sent by divinity, but he also grants us free will, which doesn't always necessarily mean he's not obligated to intervene in any of our lives, and we should be grateful that he elected to do so with ours. And if you haven't, I invite you now to invite him into your life. But, he's only half accurate in this presumption, because it's actually Satan, through the sovereign of permission of Eloah and El Shaddai, that is afflicting him. "Does the wild donkey bray when it has grass, or does the ox bellow over its fodder? It's tasteless food eaten without sale. Is there any more flavor in the juice of mallows? I refuse to touch it. They are like food when I am sick." So Job asks two questions in as many verses, then answers it in the seventh. And these, he compares tasteless food without value, without flavor, juice of the mallow, and yet when he returns to it, he is suddenly sick as a result of the proximity of exposure. So he refuses to touch what has really the analogy of the donkey and then the food is. It's going to make more sense when we continue, but it's connected to his suffering and his plight and his dilemma. None of those terms are understatements. "Oh, that I might have my desire, that Elohi would grant me for what I long for." What's he talking about here? The same thing he talked about in chapter 3. He is begging for death as a sweet release from the bitter agony of life. He considers his life to be a waste of time. In the 3rd chapter, he not only wishes to die, but wishes he had never been born. He curses the day that he had been born, So that's what he's talking about. And he wants, above all else, to just die, but he knows that suicide is wrong. He's not going to do it himself. He's just waiting or begging, or he's wants two things. He wants an audience with Yahweh, and he wants Yahweh to just eventually, as the death wishes subsides, that's what he wants. But right now, what he desires above all else is just the sweet release of death from life. Life is not worth living. Everything he had acquired, everything he had accumulated, had not been worth it. Just to lose it all through no fault of your own, suddenly and inexplicably and calamitously all at once. "Then I would have comfort, and I would rejoice in pain, though not spared, for I would have hidden the words of the Sacred One." So he's alluding to the thing he eventually asks more prominently as the book unfolds, the audience with of Elo. He wants him to know that he has not forsaken his name. He did not succumb to Satan's temptation to curse him to his face. First off, Job isn't even privy. None of them are privy to the heavenly dialogue which preceded the events, and the dialogue which is inspired by those events. But he's longing also. He's saying that death would end the pain. So he's not literally rejoicing in pain. He is in fact loathing every single second of it. But within pain, our need and our appetite and our diligence in seeking comfort becomes all the more acute in proportion to the negative dimension of that equation. What strength do I have that I should wait? And what is my end that I should prolong my life? So he's speaking as a man who is apart from Yahweh right now. He feels that Yahweh has abandoned him, and he's questioning why, because he knows that he hasn't abandoned Yahweh. He made sacrifices over his children who gathered in the many houses that he had to party with their friends. He made sacrifices for them just in case one of them sinned. So he was walking upright with perfect integrity, perfect devotion. That word perfect is also used to describe him. That does not mean sinless. It more roughly translates as blameless. But the friends insist that his blamelessness was a facade, an exterior, that he had some secret sin which unleashed this devastating plague of divine wrath as they see it, but it's actually just a testing. He is not resorting to wrath. If he was resorting to wrath, Job would have already been smithereens. He was keeping him alive for the purpose of knowing and growing in him and who he is. And so this is all to teach Job a lesson, and through Job, us. That is the purpose for which he has been kept alive. That is why Yahweh imposed that limitation through his sovereign permission about what the adversary could and could not do. He didn't suggest any of the things that the adversary did, but remember, give the devil an inch and he will take a mile. He will take the whole thing. So never, never yield, always, always resist when he shows up in your life. Verse 12, is my strength the strength of stones? Is my flesh of bronze? So, of course, he's obviously feeling weak and fallible and fragile at this moment. He is not physically well. He is not in physical health. He is not the mental devastation and the emotional devastation is going to be clouding his mind, so he's struggling, and these thoughts do get progressively more faithful and simultaneously more coherent. But the strength, he is not as strong as stones, and flesh of bronze. Flesh is by its very nature frail and fragile, and even we who are born again, our hearts and our spirits are redeemed, but our flesh remains unredeemed. The flesh is a weakness. It is morally neutral, but it's negative. It often yields to its negative potential. So we have to avoid the extremes of treating all physical matter as evil and thinking of our flesh, but also not underestimate the potentiality and the reality of the flesh. And within our unredeemed flesh exists a beachhead which Satan usually attacks. And so within each born-again believer, there's usually a glaring point of vulnerability. And if you're not aware of it, you're already defeated. That's all I can say. Verse 13, this is where we're going to close this one off. Is my help not within me, and his ability driven from me? So he feels weak, hopeless, isolated. This was a man who stood in the strength and power of Yahweh, who had blessed him for his faithfulness and his obedience and his unwavering devotion and unimpeded, uncompromised integrity and everything else. But he feels away from him from now. So he's longing for the return of the source of his strength, the source of his solace. The Hebrew word shalom, peace, indicates more than peace in the English language. It is a spiritual and often temporal prosperity and blessing, and it is the inner serenity that accompanies a mind that is at peace, which in our limited definition means not in conflict, not in cessation. But that's all the time we have for today. We'll continue this sometime soon. I hope to see you then. That's all the time we have for today. See you next time. Bye-bye.